The Italians are said to be good at parties, with lots of drinking, singing, and dancing late into the night. But Alice, who is 19 and lives on a quiet farm, has never been to one. And as she rides her bicycle down the mountain to her first party in the town, she is full of hopes and dreams and expectations. Alice hoped that the old front tire on the bicycle would burst. She had to stop twice to add more air, which was very annoying. For as long as she could remember, she had been putting air in tires, carrying firewood, cleaning out the cowshed, and doing work that is usually done by men. Her father and 2 brothers worked for the forestry company, so she and her mother had to do everything, and there were 2 children to take care of as well. They lived on a mountain farm in northern Italy, and life was hard. But on this cold evening in early September, Alice was free. She rode her bicycle down the road, happily thinking about the party. Even though she was 19, this was her first party. The invitation had come that morning only from Mrs. Parker, the owner of the commercial hotel. At first, her mother didn't want Alice to go. There was too much work to do, soup to make, and one of the children had an earache and might cry during the night. But Alice begged her mother to let her go.
"What use would it be?"
her mother said. To her, all these fun things were bad because they gave you a taste of something you couldn't have. But finally, she agreed.
"You can go, but you have to be back on time to milk the cows in the morning, and don't do anything foolish,"
her mother said. Alice was going to stay the night in town with Mrs. Parker. She had washed and brushed her hair. She was allowed to wear the black evening dress that an uncle had sent from America years ago. Her mother said a prayer to keep her safe, took her to the top of the farm road, warned her never to touch alcohol, and said goodbye. Alice felt happy as she rode along slowly, avoiding the holes in the road. It had been a very cold day. At the bottom of the hill, she got off and looked back at her house. It was the only one on the mountain, small and gray, with a piece of land at the back, which they called the vegetable garden. She looked away, now free to think of Robert Wilson. He had appeared 2 years before, riding a motorbike, and had stopped to ask the way. He was staying at the commercial hotel and had come up to see the lake, which was famous for changing color at different times of the day.
"Down there,"
she said to the stranger, pointing to the lake below. It was late summer and very hot. The grass was tall, and there were wildflowers, blood red, close to their feet.
"What an unusual sight,"
he said, looking at the lake. She wasn't interested in views herself. She just looked up at the sky and noticed that a bird had stopped in the air above them. It felt like a pause in her life, the bird above them, perfectly still. Then her mother came out to see who the stranger was. He introduced himself very politely as Robert Wilson, an English painter. She did not remember exactly how it happened, but after a while he walked into their kitchen with them and sat down for tea. 2 long years had passed since that day, but she had never stopped hoping. Perhaps this evening she would see him. The postman had said that someone special at the hotel was expecting her. It seemed to her that her happiness somehow lit up the dark windows of the small houses she passed. Suddenly, her parents were rich and cheerful. Her little sister no longer had an earache, and the kitchen fire did not smoke. Sometimes she smiled at the thought of how she would look to him, taller and more womanly now, in a dress she could wear anywhere. She forgot about the old tire, jumped on her bicycle, and rode on. The 3 street lights were on when she entered the small town. There had been a cattle market that day, and drunken farmers with sticks were still trying to find their cattle in the dark corners of the main street. As she reached the commercial hotel, Alice heard loud conversation and men singing in the bar. She didn't want to go in through the front door in case someone saw her and told her father she had gone into the public bar. So she went to the back door. It was open, but she knocked before entering. 2 girls rushed to the door. One was October O'Brien. She was well known as the only October in the whole town, and for having 1 green eye and 1 brown eye.
God, I thought it was someone important.
October said when she saw Alice standing there holding a bottle of cream. Another girl. There were far too many girls in the town. Girls like Alice, with matching eyes and long, wavy hair.
Come in or stay out?
Said Mary Barton, the second girl, to Alice. It was meant as a joke, but neither of the town girls liked Alice. They hated shy, mountain people. Alice came in, carrying the cream, which her mother had sent to Mrs. Parker as a gift. She put it on the table and took off her coat. The girls whispered to each other and giggled when they saw her dress. The kitchen smelled of fish and fried food. Mrs. Parker came in from the bar to speak to her.
Alice, I'm glad you came. These 2 girls are of no help, always giggling. The first thing we need to do is move the heavy furniture out of the drawing room upstairs, but not the piano. We're going to have dancing and everything.
Alice understood that she was being given work to do, and she blushed with shock and disappointment. She thought about her nice black dress and how her mother wouldn't even let her wear it to church on Sundays. She might tear it or get it dirty.
And then we need to start cooking the duck,
Mrs. Parker said, and went on to explain that the party was for Mr. Patrick Wilson, the local customs officer who was leaving his job.
There's someone here expecting me.
Alice said, trembling with the excitement of hearing his name spoken by someone else. She wondered which room was his and if he might be there at that moment. In her imagination, she was already knocking on his door and could hear him inside.
Expecting you?
Mrs. Parker said, looking puzzled for a moment.
Oh, that young man from the factory was asking about you. He said he saw you at a dance once. He's a strange one.
What man?
Alice asked. But Mrs. Parker heard the men in the bar shouting for her to refill their empty glasses, so she hurried out without replying. Upstairs, October and Mary helped Alice move the heavy furniture out of the drawing room. The two town girls shared jokes with each other, laughed at Alice behind her back, and ordered her around like a servant. She dusted the piano and cleaned the floor. She had come for a party. She wished she were at home, at least with cattle and chickens. It was clean dirt. Then Mary and October told Alice to get the glasses ready, and they went off to drink a secret bottle of whiskey in the bathroom.
She's crying like a baby in there.
Mary told October, laughing.
God, she looks like an idiot in that dress.
October said.
It's her mother's.
Mary replied.
What's she crying about?
October wondered.
She thought some boy would be here. Do you remember that boy who stayed here the summer before last with a motorbike? The boy with the big eyes? God, she would scare him off in that dress. Her hair isn't natural either.
October said.
I hate long black hair.
Mary said, finishing the last of the whiskey. They hid the bottle under the bath. In the room with the piano, Alice got the glasses ready. Tears ran down her face, so she didn't turn on the light. She could already see what the party would be like. They would eat the duck, the men would get drunk, and the girls would laugh. They would dance, sing, and tell ghost stories, and in the morning, she would have to get up early and be home in time for milking. She looked out of the window at the dirty street, remembering how she had once danced with Robert on the farm road, with no music at all, just their hearts beating and the sound of happiness. On that first day at tea, her father had suggested that Robert should stay with them, and he ended up staying for 5 days, helping with the farm work and machinery. Alice made his bed in the morning and brought up a bowl of rainwater every night so he could wash. She washed his shirt, and that day his back got burnt in the sun. She put milk on it. It was his last day with them. After supper, he gave each of the older children a ride on the motorbike. She would never forget that ride. Alice was filled with wonder and delight. The sun was setting. They did not talk as they rode. She had her arms around his stomach with the delicate hold of a girl in love. They stopped at the bridge and sat on a bench. She took an insect off his neck and touched the skin where there was a tiny drop of blood. It was then that they danced, to the sound of singing birds and running water. They just danced.
Sweet Alice, I cannot love you because I already have a wife and children to love. Besides, you are too young and too innocent,
Robert said, looking into her eyes. The next day, as he was leaving, he asked if he could send her something in the mail. It came 10 days later, a black and white drawing of her, very much like her, except that the girl in the drawing was uglier,
That's no good for anything.
said her mother, who had been expecting a gold bracelet or necklace. They hung the drawing on the kitchen wall for a while, but one day it fell down. Someone, probably her mother, used it with a brush to collect dirt from the floor. Alice had wanted to keep it, to put it safely away in a drawer, but she was too ashamed to. Her family were tough people, and they only cried or showed emotion when someone died.
Sweet Alice.
He had said. He never wrote. 2 summers passed. She had a feeling that he would come back, and at the same time, a terrible fear that he might not. In the upstairs room of the hotel, the men were taking off their coats and sitting down to eat. The girls had carried the duck up from the kitchen, and it lay in the center of the table. Mrs. Parker had closed the public bar and was now cutting meat off the duck and putting it onto plates. She kept Alice busy, serving the carrots and passing the food around. Mr. Patrick, as the chief guest, was served first with the best cuts of duck. Alice was surprised by how harsh the people in town seemed. When one of the men, David, tried to take her hand, she didn't smile at all. She wished she were at home. She knew what her family was doing there. The boys learning their exam, her mother cooking soup, her father burning wood and talking to himself. In another hour, they'd say their prayers and go to bed. The routine of their lives never changed. The fresh soup was always cool by morning. William, the young man who worked at the factory, had bright blue eyes and hair so blonde it was almost white.
No one's offered me any food yet. A nice way to behave.
He said,
Oh, God, Alice, haven't you given Mr. William anything to eat yet?
Mrs. Parker said, giving Alice a push to hurry her up. Alice gave him a large plate full of duck and potatoes, and he thanked her, saying they would dance later. To him, she was far prettier than those good-for-nothing town girls. She was tall and thin, like himself. And he liked a simple girl with long hair. Maybe later he would persuade her to go into another room and they would have sex. She had lovely eyes. The fifth woman at the party was Doris, the local hairdresser, who had bright red hair and didn't like the undercooked duck. She and Mrs. Parker were talking together when Patrick unexpectedly began to sing.
Let the man sing, can't you?
William said to October and Mary, who were giggling over a private joke. Alice felt cold in her thin dress. There hadn't been a fire in that room for years, and the air had not warmed up yet.
Would any of the ladies care to sing?
William asked when Patrick finished.
I'm sure you can sing.
He said to Alice.
Where she comes from, they can only just talk.
October said. Alice blushed. She said nothing, but she was angry. Her family ate with a knife and fork, she thought proudly, and had a cloth on the kitchen table, not a plastic one like this, and kept a jar of coffee in the cupboard in case strangers came to the door.
Girls, we forgot the soup,
Mrs. Parker said suddenly, and went out with October to get it from the kitchen. After the soup, William poured out 4 glasses of whiskey, making sure the level in each glass was the same. There were bottles of beer as well. The ladies had vodka and orange.
Orange for me.
Alice said, but when her back was turned, William put vodka in her orange. They all raised their glasses and drank to Patrick's future.
Come on, someone. Tell us a joke.
David said after a while. He was bored with the business talk.
I'll tell you a joke,
said Henry Winter.
Is it a funny joke?
Patrick asked.
It's about my brother Charles.
Henry Winter said.
Not that old thing again,
said David and William together.
Oh, let him tell it,
said Mrs. Parker, who had never heard it. Henry Winter told a story about his brother, who had died but came back a month later as a ghost, walking around the yard.
Oh God, let's have a bit of music,
David said, who had heard that story 8 or 9 times. It had neither a beginning, a middle, nor an end. They put a song on, and William asked Alice to dance. Patrick and Mrs. Parker were dancing too, and Doris said she'd dance if anyone asked her. Alice felt strange. Her head was going round and round, and in her stomach there was a nice feeling that made her want to lie back and stretch her legs. It was a new feeling that frightened her. William danced her out of the room, and in the dark passage, he kissed her. Inside the room, Doris had begun to cry. Vodka and orange always made her cry.
David, there is no happiness in my life,
she cried bitterly.
What happiness?
David asked, who was full of drink. October and Mary sat on either side of Henry Winter, talking sweetly to him. He was a strange man, but he owned a large bakery and was still single. Patrick, breathless from dancing, was now sitting down with Mrs. Parker on his knees. The song finished, and Alice ran in from the dark passage, away from William, who followed her in, laughing. William was the first to cause trouble. He got offended when Mrs. Parker stopped him from telling a rude joke.
Think of the girls.
Mrs. Parker said.
Girls.
William said nastily. He picked up the bottle of cream and poured it over the remaining bits of duck.
Christ, man.
David said, taking the bottle of cream away. Mrs. Parker said it was time everyone went to bed, as the party seemed to be over. All the guests were staying the night at the hotel. The 4 girls were going to share one room. In the bedroom, Alice sighed. Before they could go to bed, they had to move the heavy furniture back to the drawing room. She could hear William shouting and singing in another room. She realized now that there had been vodka in her orange because she could smell it in her breath. She had broken her promise to her mother. It would bring her bad luck.
Ah, girls. Where's my lovely Alice? Come out here with me, Alice.
William said, pushing their bedroom door open.
Go to bed, you're tired.
Alice said. He caught her hand and began to drag her out of the room. She let out a cry.
I'll throw this lamp at you if you don't leave the girl alone,
Mary said.
You stupid cows.
William said. He dropped Alice's hand and took a step backward. The girls rushed to shut the door and push a heavy chest against it to keep him out. They all got into the one big bed, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom. Alice was glad to have the other girls with her.
I was at a party. Now I know what parties are like,
she said to herself as she tried to force herself to sleep. She heard the sound of water running. But it didn't seem to be raining outside. At sunrise, she woke up. She had to get home in time for milking, so she put on her dress and shoes and went downstairs. There was a strong smell of vodka. Someone, probably William, had turned on the taps in the bar, and vodka had flowed out of the bar and into the kitchen. Mrs. Parker would be angry. Alice made her way carefully across the room to the door. She left without even making a cup of tea. She found her bicycle, but the front tire was flat, so she walked quickly, pushing it. She did not feel tired, rather pleased to be outside, breathing in the warm sun. Mrs. Parker woke at 9 and got out of Patrick's warm bed. She sensed disaster instantly and ran to call the others. The girls got up and helped clean the floors. David, who had by then come downstairs, said what a shame it was to waste good drink. William, the guilty one, had left early.
Where's the girl in the black dress?
David asked.
She ran off before we got up.
October said. They all agreed that Alice was useless and should never have been asked.
And she was the one who encouraged William and then disappointed him, so he got angry,
added October.
I suppose she's home by now,
David said. Alice was half a mile from home, sitting on the grass.
If only I had a boy, someone to love, something to hold on to,
she thought, as she broke some ice with her shoes. The poor birds could find no food, as the ground was frozen hard. There was frost all over Italy, frost on the green fields, and on all the ugliness of the world. Walking again, she wondered what she would tell her mother and brothers, and if all parties were as bad. She reached the top of the hill and saw her own house, a little gray box at the end of the world, waiting to welcome her